Right, so today I want to make this video on why people believe the things they do, why it's so hard to get them to change. And this article from Psychology Today by Ralph Lewis is what I'm kind of going to talk about a little. I think he does a good job of talking about why people believe the things they do and why it's so hard to get them to change when their views are clearly irrational or whatever you want to call it. And I do want to tie it more into the political realm. This article doesn't really get into that, but I do want to tie that in. And basically, for starters, um, beliefs are our brain's way of making sense and of navigating our complex world. They're basically mental representations of the ways our brains expect things in our environment to behave and how things are related to each other. The brain is our most expensive energy, or it uses the most energy of any of the organs we have in our body, which means, number one, it was going to be the most subjected to evolution over time. Um, and number two, it's going to want to do the least amount of work possible to get the most result. So basically, it wants to conserve energy whenever it can, which means think as little as it can to figure out whatever you need to do. And a lot of times that's good, but a lot of times it's not as good. Um, these shortcuts to interpreting and predicting our world involve connecting dots and filling gaps, making exploitations or extrapolations and assumptions based on our incomplete information, based on similarly to previously recognized patterns. So basically, it'll take a past pattern and use that in the future to figure out whatever you need to figure out. This few paragraphs basically says that we basically over perceive past experiences or personal experiences when formulating worldviews. This is the parts that I really wanted to get into. So basically, primitive nervous systems evolved in simple organisms in part to serve the function homeostasis, which is a dynamic physical state of equilibrium or stability, a steady state of internal conditions, which basically means you don't want to experience inconsistent or different conditions. Homeostasis is structured around a natural resistance to change, which is like the same principles as thermostat. So basically, why people don't want to change their views, and if you look at people who won't change their views, it's generally the same or similar kind of people. They're people that always have beliefs, not always, but usually have beliefs that are widely accepted. There is the really crazy people, but uh, people most, or the views that are hardest to change are the ones that are most widely held, right? Because if everyone else is doing it, well then it must be right, right? Which is another psychological principle that when people are unsure of things or not sure how to act, not sure what to believe, they generally default to the societal norm, which is why in like high schools and prisons and all this stuff you get the cliques and whatnot going, which is because people don't want to stand out, and it's also the worst for women, and that's for the reason that evolutionarily, women for most of the world history, not anymore, but they were very vulnerable in the fact that they were generally uh, pregnant a lot, giving birth, breastfeeding, all that stuff, and obviously they wouldn't really be able to fight for themselves very much or at all during these times, which means they needed to be more cooperative with women and men, more or less women, because you got the other women in the tribe that maybe some of them aren't pregnant and they need or you need their help to eat and raise your kids and whatnot, and you help them eat and raise their kids when you're not. So, um, psych the whole psychological state of being cliquey and ostracism. Ostracism tends to work better on women for that. From that reasoning, is because evolutionarily, it was a lot worse for a woman to be ostracized from a group than a man, and it's just evolution. Why that happened? It's not sexism or any of that crap. Um, the lower primitive parts of our human brains maintain homeostasis of breathing, heart rates, basically everything. It goes on to say other things like this paragraph is kind of what I wanted to talk about as well. Another important factor for accounting for resistance to changing our beliefs is the way our beliefs are so often intertwined with how we define ourselves as people. So you know a lot of people that's religious people, they'll define, it's a part of them, their religious beliefs. People who are very political, that's a part of them, especially like socialists and whatnot. Um, like socialists tend to literally view themselves or their political beliefs the same way a religious person views their religion. Um, it says in many cases people have a lot invested in their personal belief system. That's obviously true. I don't think anyone's going to debate that. They may have staked their reputation on their political belief or particular belief, sorry. Not infrequently, people structure their whole lives around a belief, and this investment may go as far as a sense of self, extending to large material or financial investments. A change of belief for such a person would obviously involve a monumental upheaval and may entail intolerable personal losses. And this is really where I wanted to stop and talk about, in that if you're debating someone on the left about politics, or even on the right, but it's much worse on the left, because if you're debating someone on the left about the welfare state, universal health care, any of that stuff like that, if you're on the left and you believe in that kind of stuff because it benefits you, so you're debating someone about universal health care, well, they're probably someone who's more unhealthy or perceives themselves to be more unhealthy, and they view you not having or not giving them universal health care as taking away health care, that you want to basically kill them, which wouldn't be the case, obviously, because anyone with, if you look at private health care, all that would happen would, uh, people who can't afford it would get it through charity, and a lot of the people who use a lot of healthcare would just change their how they go about their day-to-day life. They wouldn't eat as unhealthy. They would exercise and whatnot. Studies show that about 2/3 of medical issues are lifestyle related, which means if you take away universal health care, people wouldn't just die and not have health care. They would just change their lifestyle, and almost 2/3 of the cost would probably go down. Um, if you're debating someone about welfare, well, people would say that um, they generally are on welfare, which means they view, or they're on welfare, or they view it as a moral good, even though it's not a moral good because you're stealing money, or you're at least using the threat of violence to take that money to fund it. They view it as you're basically getting rid of their gene set, basically, because you have the two basic gene sets. One of them is more prone towards the left. Obviously, the other one's more prone towards the right. And if you got rid of that, they perceive that as you wanting to get rid of their gene set, which is why they fight so hard against it, which is exactly what this goes on to say. Not infrequently, people structure their whole lives around it, and this may go as far as a sense of self, and they have extending to large material and financial investments or life's career. The other thing about something like getting rid of welfare is that people have very cushy, maybe not cushy, very cushy, but moderately cushy lives doing that. One of the podcasts I listened to, they had a debate about this, and one of the guys basically went on to say that growing up, his mom was always on welfare, and one day he went to her and said, you have experience working in restaurants, and why don't you go and get a job at a restaurant? And she told him, well, I make just as much money on welfare as I would working at a restaurant. Why would I do that? So, and I know that's just one experience, or one personal experience, but there's literally, I believe, upwards of 50 million people in the U.S. Reliant on government programs like welfare, like Medicaid and whatnot. So it's definitely not just a personal experience. Um, so basically, if you got rid of welfare, well, that person's entire financial life is invested in that. It's more than a minimum wage, or roughly to a minimum wage job of investment in believing what they do. So basically, that person's being paid like $30,000, $40,000 a year to believe what they do, basically, which is exactly what this says, or it says. Extends a large material or financial investment in a belief system, and that's why you're debating someone about lowering taxes. Even is tied into getting rid of the welfare state. There's tens of millions of people that have tens of thousands of dollars invested in this position. So that's why they're obviously not going to change. And that's the same as abortion too. I made a video about abortion. You can check that out for more on that too. So the social dimension of belief. This is the other part I wanted to talk to. A lot of our belief framework is learned from an early age from parents or other adult authority figures. Many human beings are the cumulative products of millennia and of human culture. Children are strongly predisposed to believe their parents or people around them's views. I wouldn't say parents. I think this article is very off when it comes to this. I would say it's more school, college. Those are basic, and the media. Those are the three big ones. Public school is incredibly biased, and they do a lot of indoctrinating kids into not questioning belief systems, basically for the basic reason that public schools are funded through taxes, colleges are funded through a lot of taxes as well. And so if you're a public school funded through taxes, well, why would you want to, or a public school teacher funded through taxes, why would you want to talk to your kids about questioning the morality and the ethicalness of taxes, of different beliefs? Well, of course you're not going to do that. Public school teachers get very good money to do what they do. Well, they don't get very good money, but they get a lot of time off. So when you add it up, it's very good money. So basically, they're being we're paid from a system that is immoral, coercive, and whatnot. So why would you talk with your kids that you're teaching about questioning authority, about questioning our social norms, when if you did, they'd be more likely to question that social norm of taxation, of public schools in general. So it's money is probably the biggest corrupter in the world, and that's what we're dealing with here. And like I said, I really want to reiterate this point too as well, is that evolutionarily we were basically it was beat into us that questioning the societal norm was not good, because 1,000, 2,000 years ago, you're in some small tribe and you question the social norm and they didn't like it. Well, they would kick you out of the tribe and you'd be on your own. You'd have to do everything on your own for survival. And if you thought about the possibility of doing that, that would be extremely hard on you. Having to do everything for yourself back in the day, that would be so super hard. So basically, what people did as a evolutionarily adaptation mechanism was that they didn't do that. Because if you did and you weren't successful, well, you'd be kicked out of the group, you'd be ostracized, and you'd most likely die, and you wouldn't be able to have kids, which was passing on your genes is a very important part of living, and that's one of the other major reason for people making decisions or political decisions. So that's the biggest reason I'd say, is that from an evolutionary perspective, it's not beneficial for people to question societal norms, for the basic reason that if you do and you're not successful, you'll be ostracized, you'll most likely die, you'll be alone, you'll have no friends, all that stuff. And that happens to a smaller extent today, like I mentioned with the cliques in high schools and whatnot. Another thing I mentioned too that's a big one is the fact that women tend to be more predisposed to this, and I already went over why it is. Um, it's obviously because women were more vulnerable, so they needed to cooperate rather than cooperate more than men. Men would be obviously better at hunting and stuff back in the day, so given that they're stronger, they're faster runners and whatnot. So that's about it as far as this topic goes. And this is a big one because everyone's had those, especially when you're very politically involved, having debates with people, and you know you're right, and I think they know you may be right too, but they don't change their mind. And I just wanted to make this video for why people don't change their views, and I would say it's for two main, or one of maybe more than one or two or three, but they're mainly the willingness to fit in and the fact that ostracism is very painful. That's, I'd say, are probably the biggest one. Indoctrination by schools and the media, that's probably the next biggest one. And then just not wanting to acknowledge that maybe you were wrong. That's probably the next biggest one. And it definitely could be a combination of them, but that's what I would say is that it's it's just not beneficial for a lot of these people, and they don't view it as beneficial for them. You got someone, like I mentioned, on welfare. They're getting paid very good money to not change their belief system. Someone who's a public school teacher, they're getting paid very good money to not change their belief system. So that's kind of why it is how it is. But anyways, that's about all I have for this topic. If you like the video, make sure to hit that like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more.